Hi, this is Foreplay Radio Sex Therapy. I'm Lori Watson, sex therapist and author of Wanting Sex Again, and I'm here with my co-host, marriage and family therapist, Tony Del Medico. We are here to help couples keep it hot.
You can check us out on the web at foreplayrst.com, and you can find us on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter. We'd love to hear from you. Lori, where is Foreplay going to take us today?
Ooh, this is a good one, Tony. We're going to talk about go oral or go home.
Go oral or go home.
Which is your title.
I know.
So start us off. What does it mean?
It just
go
came out.
Go oral or go home.
Well, I think right up front we should be saying we're going to be talking about oral sex.
For men. Fellatio.
Fellatio.
Right.
Exactly.
Giving men oral sex.
Yeah. So,
or getting oral sex if you are a guy.
Yeah. So in your experience as a sex therapist, do you find that oral sex for men continues well after the couple gets married or goes into a committed relationship, or do you find
softball,
or do you find that it diminishes over time?
Yeah, I think this is your title really captures, I think, the frustration that men feel that somehow or another, oral sex seems to drop off after marriage
precipitously.
Yeah,
many men report.
Yeah, and I think that there's so much rage about that, and I don't blame them. There's suddenly it's like, well, she used to do it when I was dating and when we were together then, and why doesn't she do it now? I mean, there's just this frustration. Like somehow or another, oral sex becomes this really exotic act where it used to be just kind of part of the routine and part of what they did.
And men, it seems like men get duped over and over. And in the culture, everyone lampoons the fact that oral sex drops off.
Duped.
And yet all men.
That is a really strong word.
And yet all men entering into relationship thinks it's going to be different with us. It's, she wouldn't do that to me. It's going to be great. It's great now. It's going to be great forever. We don't even have to try. She wants me. She desires me. That tender male ego sort of ballasts itself as it goes through this period. And I think many men wake up really confused. Like, well, did she have an agenda in this thing?
Did she trick me?
Have I been
Was it
duped?
bait and
Have
switch?
I been tricked? Exactly.
Was it bait and switch?
Is the honeymoon truly over?
Yeah, I do think your word duped is a really angry word and is descriptive, though, of how men report this to me. So I think you've captured something there. They just feel so hurt and so somehow or another deceived that this very important part to them of the sexual experience goes away. In the University of Quebec, there was a research study that was done in 2015, that basically studied, people's sexual fantasies. And the number 2 fantasy for men was of receiving oral sex. I mean, this is so high, not just on an individual guy's mind, but I think in general, oral sex, that's where it's at for him.
By and large is a real turn on.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that doesn't go away. Number 1, incidentally, was men receiving oral sex. So, what was number 1? Do you remember?
Yeah, I do. Actually, it was having sex with a romantic partner. It was the same for men and for women.
Gotcha.
So that was the research. It was about 1,500 adults that were surveyed over the internet.
Fabulous. And number 2 is right there. So that doesn't go away.
Number 1 and number 2.
Yeah.
Right.
So that shouldn't surprise anyone. I don't think who's listening today. I'm wondering, and it's a bit of an aside, but we're kind of talking about something that for a couple was on the table and in play when they started together, and somehow this has been taken off the table.
Right.
And we're focusing today on oral sex, but I'm wondering if there was something else that was taken off the table. If the male mind just doesn't start to focus
right,
on
her letting him
it
give
is.
her oral sex often gets removed from the table as well, suddenly. But I think in general, your point is that for some people in couples, that sex, once you marry or once you commit to each other, it should be this highway, right, of sexual freedom. But what we observe is that sex becomes constricted. That no longer are the things that they were doing that were really experimental and maybe hot and full of variety, that suddenly they're doing something that is more constricted, less variety, not as exciting.
In the box.
Yeah,
Back in the box.
Yeah. In the box.
Why is that? You would think over time that you would, in general, couples would begin to explore more and more the boundaries of the things they like and they don't like, and very naturally we don't.
Right. I think that there are reasons for that. I think that, in the beginning, like in a one-night stand or the first time you have sex with somebody, oftentimes that person really is not that meaningful to you. Mm-hmm. And so people let out their kind of crazy wild side, and they don't care what that person thinks about them. But later in partnership, we care so much about our partner's feelings about us and their potential judgment of us that we start self-editing what we put out there. It just takes one look from your partner after you've suggested something that you go, oh, okay, I am never going to suggest that again. Yeah. I have...
So with hookups, you're less vulnerable and you're able to risk more.
Right.
And then as the vulnerability increases, as you actually grow closer to someone, somehow...
Our sexual vulnerability seems to go down instead of rise to the occasion. I can't help but hear sexual innuendo in both of those things, right?
Yeah.
I do think that people somehow or another are worried about what their partner thinks. Either if you bring a new idea and they think, well, where did you get that? Have you been with somebody else? Where did you get that idea? Or gosh, that's something that you wanted to do and you haven't told me, and there's this feeling of disappointment. You really don't bring to me your ideas and your creativity. And so it's this once in a blue moon thing that people offer. Yeah, well, I kind of wanted to try that.
Do you think that's a cultural thing, sort of good girls don't and bad girls do kind of thing?
Absolutely. I think for women it is. And I think that, you're talking specifically about oral sex, that good girls don't give oral sex. Yeah, I think that in certain cultural certain cultures, that's true. That there is this sense that giving oral sex means you're a bad girl. And so they don't do it. Or that it's something that has to be given as a reward. And there is nothing that kills kind of natural sexual desire and love between a couple when sex becomes an exchange for being good or, giving each other something, you take out the garbage and I'll give you oral. There's just something so soul killing in that when sex becomes a quid pro quo sort of experience.
To turn the thing inside out, Lori, do you find that there are men out there who don't feel comfortable receiving oral sex?
Yes. And I think one main thing I'd like to say is a lot of men can't climax with oral sex because it doesn't include usually the thrusting motion. And so they need kind of that hip motion to climax, and they need a firmer touch. And so, a lot of men don't climax, and women say, it takes me forever to give him oral sex. Whereas if we're having intercourse, he can climax easily. And some men just don't like oral sex. It's not top of their list. Mm-hmm. Very few, as you kind of indicated, and as the study shows, probably very few. But there are some men out there that are not crazy about it.
I'm thinking about the man who just can't relax in the act of receiving. Mm-hmm. So some men are very anxious and feel like they need to be doing and performing. It can be very hard just to sit back and remain undefended. And just actually drop into your body and receive pleasure. So.
Just to receive. I think that's true, that men have trouble sometimes just receiving. They should be doing something. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes it goes to an extreme. Men report being ticklish when they're receiving oral sex, and that is often kind of a sign that they're anxious, and so they can't feel the pleasure of the whole thing. But we don't want to spend too much time on that because
I was also
hardly any man out there cares about that, I think.
Well, I was also thinking about the female ego, so that you had reported that men have trouble having orgasm during oral sex, and so oftentimes women will take that on as, I'm not doing it right, I'm not good enough, what's wrong with me? Mm-hmm. And I think we're trying to debunk that myth that there's actually nothing wrong.
Sure, and that is one main reason I think that I hear from women that they don't give oral sex as much because they don't get enough feedback and they don't know if they're doing it well.
Gotcha. So maybe in the second half of the program we can spend some time talking about techniques. So. Right,
and I think men say to me often, the only difference between good oral sex and bad oral sex is enthusiasm. Does she want to do it? Does she enjoy it? Does she feel pleasure at me in her mouth? Does she take pleasure in my pleasure? I think being a grown-up and having an erotic self that's developed is that you take pleasure in what gives your partner pleasure.
Right. So, you actually feel the joy of being desired.
And you feel
and that's one way.
by
I think
that.
that's a prime way that a man can feel that.
Yeah.
She actually wants me this much, that she's doing this.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And it's so intimate. I think men feel so wanted and desired when a woman does that. Yeah. It's really a affirming act.
Great.
Yeah. When I got married, I will say that the preacher's wife told me, that oral sex is kind of like worshiping at his altar. I think she really got it in terms of how special this was and how important it was to a male and how intimate his penis is connected to his heart. That this whole thing really, really means she loves him.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, Lori, we're near the end of the first session here.
Good.
So stay tuned. We'll be back with the second half of Go Oral or Go Home. This is Foreplay Radio Sex Therapy.
We'll be right back.
Wanting sex again. How to rediscover desire and heal a sexless marriage by certified sex therapist Lori Watson.
Each chapter is designed to fix one of the problems that cause low libido, from early marriage through the childbearing years, even all the way through menopause. I've also had men read it and tell me that for them it was the most hopeful thing they read about resolving sexual problems.
Look for Wanting Sex Again on Amazon.com. You can also talk to Lori Watson for therapy in person or via Skype.
I offer couples counseling and sex therapy, and I think about both aspects of the relationship, emotional intimacy and sexual technique, and that combination together helps marriages be happy.
Improve your sex and improve your relationship with Awakening Center for Couples and Intimacy. Find out more at awakenloveandsex.com and sign up for their next couples retreat weekend, hosted by Lori Watson. awakenloveandsex.com. Awaken what's possible.
Welcome back to Foreplay Radio Sex Therapy. We are talking today about going oral or going home. I'm Tony Del Medico, marriage and family therapist, and I'm here with Lori Watson, sex therapist and author. And Lori, we talked a lot about
kind of the rage that men feel when oral sex goes missing after they've committed or married.
Sort of the dynamics of what goes on in a marriage and a couple. So I'm wondering in the second half, maybe we can get to some technique if you feel that might be good ground to cover.
Some of the reasons that women give why they stop giving oral sex, do focus on technique and issues that are problematic for them.
And you were saying the biggest technique near the end of the first half was enthusiasm.
That's right. That's right. I mean, men say, does she really want to do it? That's what makes it good for him. If he knows she does, then he can sit back and relax, kind of the way you were talking about it.
So it makes him feel appreciated. There's a bit of an ego stroke. I'm wondering if there's some power dynamic there, some submission. I don't know if you want to touch on any of that.
Sure. I mean, I think that for men, sometimes there's the sense that they are being given to, so they're dominant. And I think for women, sometimes there's the sense of, I'm holding his very private parts in my mouth between my teeth, and there's kind of a dominance in that. I mean, it can be both, or maybe she's giving to him so she's submissive. I think dominance and submission really are kind of very big themes that are woven through our sexual expression and our feelings of desire. I mean, our arousal patterns are kind of formed very early in life and complicated as we become adults with many things, but those are kind of two big ones.
So does technique, we talked a lot in earlier episodes about techniques for women and oral sex. I'm wondering, does technique matter for men as much?
I have not heard that that's as important. I mean, for some men, they say, yeah, she really does it lousy, but most of that is because she's anxious, and that's conveyed during the act.
So when you have a woman that comes into your consulting room and she says, this is a growing edge for me, I want to learn how to perform oral sex for my partner, do you take the time and bring her through things that might help her be successful in that? Or
Yes. I mean,
what would you say?
The first thing I ask is, what gets in your way? What are you feeling about it that stops you from wanting to give it? And I would say, the number one thing that women go through is really kind of this sense of an ick factor about,
it's gross.
Is it dirty or it's gross, or there's aspects of it that are gross or dirty. And I cannot overemphasize the need for clean for men. And I had one guy who say, well, that's ridiculous. I like her smells. Why would she want to, me to shower off first? Why can't she enjoy my smells? And all I can say is, if it gets you more oral sex, please just take a shower. I mean, that's just a crazy argument.
That's a stubborn man. Yeah. I mean, just because he enjoys the sense doesn't necessarily mean that she does or has to.
Right.
So he can enjoy his experience as he wants it.
I asked a girlfriend who, we had been friends for, they'd been married for 25 years, and we were all hiking together. And it was a weekend that some friends and I were out together. And she said, as many of my girlfriends do, they talk to me about sex. And she said, I don't like to give oral sex. And I said, why not? And she said, well, I'm worried about, that if he doesn't smell right or he's not that clean. And I'm like, okay, so what have you told him? And she says, well, I'm kind of afraid to tell him to take a shower because it's so insulting. And I said, oh, just tell him. Please tell him. And so later on in the hike, the next day, he kind of walked by me and very casually said, thank you.
Nice. Then he jumped in the Alpine Lake and got scrubbed up for a night in the tent. Good for you, Laurie.
Yeah.
Always working hard. Always working hard.
This is actually one place that can really be helpful for somebody learning or relearning how to give oral sex. Is the shower is a great place because it's absolutely clean. There are no smells. There are no tastes that are really possible because there's so much water. It can be great. To try it again in the shower for the first time back.
Yeah. Oddly enough, as couples, we typically don't have a problem saying, hey, could you brush your teeth?
Yeah.
Right? And then somehow saying, hey,
take a shower.
Your parts that have been cooped up all day aren't smelling fresh.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Why wouldn't we say get cleaned up if you want to have some fun?
Yes. And I think the second thing that I hear from women is this kind of gag reflex. They are afraid that they're going to choke. That it's too much in their mouth, and they don't know how to control it, especially for men. Sometimes men get carried away, and they put their hands on the back of her head, and they push down. And I just got to say, never do that. Just never, ever do that. And I understand, it feels so good, and that's why he's doing it, but it's just the wrong thing to do because it can gag her, and it will, turn her off. And that's the last thing you want to do, guys, is turn her off. So don't do that. So
you're saying leave her in control of the process.
Yes. Yeah. And what I tell her is that, good oral sex often requires, and it is accompanied by good manual technique. So she can control depth by using her hands. And the men who have trouble climaxing with just oral sex often can climax with sort of more tension, more manual tension at the same time.
Okay. So you're talking about hand around the base.
Right, around the shaft of the penis.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that can be helpful.
Yeah. What's flashing through right now is the go-to nowadays is to look at porn. So to get all of your information from porn, and looking at porn, some of those things are quite extraordinary in terms of what goes on.
Right, the whole deep throat thing.
Yeah, and grabbing of the head. And you're saying that that's not the way to go. And that if a woman can't perform like that,
I think men are willing to accommodate oftentimes if it means getting more oral sex and it's not, the absolute fantasy. I think that men would say, oh, yeah, do what makes you comfortable just so that they have more of it.
Sure. If a woman wants to get good at it, can that technique be taught and can it be learned? And
Well, first of all, I think it's just like what we tell women. Please help her by giving her encouragement and telling her that she's doing a good job or that you love it. I mean, maybe she's not perfect yet, but tell her how much you love it, how much you're glad she's doing it. Maybe assist her some in doing it. I think that criticism is so problematic when you're in the bed.
Well, I've had couples come into the consulting room that, it's her fault. She just won't learn. She won't learn to relax her throat. She doesn't care. She doesn't want to try. So there's this big impasse, and it puts pressure on her to be.
And any act, I got to say, even oral sex, even though it's so important, there are some reasons that maybe we don't understand fully in the beginning. But if a person absolutely does not want to do an act, I mean, you got to accept that in some ways. This one, I feel like oral sex gets kind of caught in latency for a lot of couples. And what I mean by that is, remember when you're 12 years old and you heard about French kissing. And the first reaction is, ooh, that's disgusting. Well, oral sex, for whatever reason, is caught and snagged in this sense of latency. We're not grown up yet. We haven't accepted that sex has its own tastes and its own smells. And so it's like we're more childlike in that. And we can develop and become more adult in learning that these things are part of sex and they're not necessarily taste icky or bad. They're just different. It's a smell and a taste that we're not familiar with. And so becoming more familiar, we can grow. But I would say for every woman, for every man, there may be a sex act that they got to say no to. And I know it would be terribly, dreadfully disappointing, but sometimes that is a bottom line, has to be accepted.
Right. And that may be a line that's drawn in the sand at the very beginning, so you know the rules of engagement and the boundaries in the relationship. And I think that's very different than the drop-off in oral sex afterwards.
The frustration later. I think there is a difference. I will say, though, I'm just thinking of an extreme case, but a woman who was molested, maybe forced to give oral sex, fellatio at some point, and her excitement and her joy in the relationship early overrides her anxiety about it. But then, ironically, when she's safe in a committed relationship, some of these tensions and memories start to emerge. And so it could be that. And I'm not saying that a woman who doesn't want to give oral sex was molested. Right. That's not what I'm saying.
Right.
But sometimes there are real reasons that are not about withholding and not about not wanting to give to your partner.
Yeah. And as therapists, I think in any oral sex or any kind of intimate act, if there are traumatic memories that come up, you go see a therapist and get some work around those memories, because it could liberate you from them. So,
yes.
Yeah.
And I would say another thing that women feel very anxious about is ejaculating in her mouth. And sometimes men really don't care. They reach the point of inevitability and they're going to climax any old way. So if they knew that it didn't, that she would give him oral sex as long as he didn't climax in her mouth, they would absolutely take that.
And some men take the opposite approach, which is, now wait, you're having an orgasm while I'm performing oral sex on you. Why don't you reciprocate?
Right.
Fair's fair.
Fair's fair, but it is different, right? I mean, most women don't ejaculate in his mouth. Mm-hmm. So there's something that is different about that for a man giving a woman oral sex.
Can you give us I don't know if you would know, but is there a study that's been done that give you what percentage of women swallow and what percentage of women do not?
I don't know that. I really don't know that.
Anecdotally, any thoughts?
I mean, I would say
not to put you on the spot.
Sure.
But
Anecdotally, men who want her to swallow versus men who are just fine if she swallowing is different than him climaxing in her mouth, right? Mm-hmm. If he climaxes in her mouth and she spits it out or she swallows, again, I think vast majority could care less what she does with it. I have heard some men talk about it with a lot of kind of heartfelt need, like this is her really taking me inside her, and this is completion. But I'm not sure necessarily sensation-wise that there's any difference to him.
Right.
So I'm not sure exactly why it's as big a deal to him.
So that sounds like a little bit of male ego. Yeah, a little bit of male ego in the mix there, maybe?
Not ego, but maybe psychologically. There's a sense of acceptance that he feels from that. But again, I think if you're a guy and you don't care, please make that clear. The other thing women say, is I don't know when he's going to climax. And I just think, if you've been with a lover for a few years, you really ought to know what he feels like before he is going to ejaculate. But maybe, they do the old, it's sexual intercourse. And so she doesn't really know what he feels like. So I would say tell her. And some women say, it happened once in college. He told me he wouldn't climax in my mouth. And then he tricked me. He did anyway. And it's like sometimes men early in their life, they don't have as much control. So it's not really that he was purposely doing that, but, it wound up that way. So,
yeah. Well, Lori,
we talked about a lot of things here.
We did. We got to some technique. We got to some rules of engagement. We got to some of the psychological issues around oral sex for men. Thank you for tuning in to Foreplay Radio Sex Therapy. Lori, before we go, I'm wondering if you have a tip.
I think that the lack of oral sex, by and large, can be helped and healed so that people get comfortable with it.
And I think the tip I heard today for me was, gentlemen, fellas, be sure that you're clean.
Yeah.
Put yourself in a good position so
Yeah.
that if oral sex has an opportunity to happen, that won't be a barrier.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for tuning in today with Foreplay Radio Sex Therapy. We will be back with some more Foreplay later. Hey, help us stay on top here at Foreplay. We'd love it if you would subscribe and share it with your friends. And please take 1 sec and rate and review us. Thanks so much.